By now, I'm sure most of you have heard about the deep web. It's been mentioned more and more frequently in connection with things like Silk Road, child exploitation rings, and other dark corners of the internet. I've even heard rumors of websites where people could spy on and sell children. Despite all the horrifying things whispered about the deep web, nothing could have prepared me for what I stumbled upon. Martinet. If you asked me where I first heard the name, I couldn't give you a clear answer. It was like fragments of its existence had been filtering into my awareness over the years, random whispers, stray comments, a lingering sense of dread. Even from those fragmented pieces, I knew Martinet was a place I wasn't nearly twisted enough to explore. But fate, or perhaps something darker, had other plans, and her name was Amanda. We met in a statistics class, Stat 120, every Thursday night. I'm not exactly smooth when it comes to girls, but when she mentioned she was from Sedona, I couldn't resist making a joke about the infamous Sedona vortexes. "So," I grinned, "how many aliens have you seen?" A few classmates gave me odd looks, but Amanda just smiled, a sly glimmer in her eyes. "3," she said, deadpan. We hit it off after that. Week by week, we grew closer. Eventually, she invited me over to her place. Her apartment was small but cozy, with shelves lined with books and a faint smell of lavender incense. That night, we smoked weed and let a folk Pandora station play softly in the background. A few shots of tequila later, the vibe shifted. I was pouring another drink when Amanda suddenly looked at me, her expression serious, almost haunted. "I shouldn't," she whispered. "What do you mean?" Her eyes flickered, searching mine. "I think you really like me," she said. "What gave you that idea?" I joked, trying to lighten the mood. She hesitated. "It would just be meaningless for me." The words stung more than I'd care to admit. As much as I was down for meaningless hookups, there was something about Amanda that had me hooked. Her words, however, were like a wall I couldn't climb. The mood shattered. Awkwardly, I got dressed and left her place, the tequila burning in my chest. The following week, she didn't show up to class. At first, I didn't think much of it, but when she missed another week, I started calling her, texting, messaging her on Facebook. Nothing. No reply. By the third week, desperation crept in. I decided to drive to her apartment. When I arrived, her front door was unlocked, but Amanda wasn't there. The silence inside her place felt unnatural, like the walls were holding their breath. I debated calling the police, but decided to look around first. Something told me the answers were here, hidden in plain sight, or perhaps waiting to be found. I opened the laptop and started looking around. That's when I found it. The torrent download for the program, Martinet. She'd already installed it, and there, minimized in the corner of the screen, was a chat log. I clicked on the shortcut. The window opened to reveal a private conversation between Amanda and 3 other users. They were talking about prices. My heart skipped a beat. They'd agreed to pay $20,000. I felt sick to my stomach. It wasn't for sex, was it? Was she a prostitute? I frantically scrolled up, desperate to understand what this was about. But the last message stopped me cold. It was a date. Monday night at 3 a.m. Then, suddenly, a new message popped up on the screen. Alpha. Server, hello. A familiar voice echoed from behind me. Is someone in here? It was Amanda. I froze for a moment, then responded, my voice shaky. It's me. There was a long silence. Then she snapped. What the hell, Leo? I was worried about you. Mind raced as I tried to think of a response. Well, don't. You don't know me. Her tone hardened. What makes you think you can just come into my house like this? I apologized repeatedly, but she wasn't having it. The anger in her voice was sharp, but even more unsettling was the way she looked. There were deep bags under her eyes. Her skin had a sickly, pale hue, and her thin hair was covered by a purple bandana. Just get the hell out and don't come back here." Her words stung, but I masked it. I pretended it didn't bother me, nodded, and walked out, closing the door behind me. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the image of her face. Pale, exhausted, and barely recognizable. Had she always looked like that? Had I missed it? What was she getting herself involved in? I barely slept that night. The next few days at school were a blur. I hadn't known Amanda for very long, but I couldn't just forget about her. I had to know what was happening. By Monday afternoon, the compulsion took hold of me. I downloaded the Martinet client. It didn't take long to figure out. The program was easy to navigate. There were only 5 servers, alpha, beta, and so on. I clicked through a few of them, but nothing caught my eye until I landed on the Delta server. There, in the chat bar, were 4 users. 2 of them had prices beside their names. I learned that all the servers were free to watch, as long as someone was paying for the shows in real time. But what I saw on the Delta server made my blood run cold. A girl with tribal tattoos was performing. Some grotesque act, sticking all sorts of miscellaneous objects inside of her. Whatever the users requested, she would somehow pull it from outside the screen, like she was conjuring it from thin air. I felt nauseous, my skin crawling as I watched the chat fill with comments. The users, dozens of them, were calling out, demanding more, eager for the show to continue. I kept my eyes on the screen, unable to look away. By 3 a.m., there were at least 20 users in the room. At the top of the chat bar, I saw the names of the 3 paying users. I recognized them from Amanda's computer. Each one was sharing their portion of that $20,000. It wasn't just some casual online fetish group. This was something far darker, and Amanda had been involved. Suddenly, the black screen flickered to life, and there she was, Amanda, her striking green eyes staring into the camera. She looked even worse than when I last saw her. Was she sick? "Hi, everyone," she said, her voice forced as she tried to smile. I guess word got around. The chat bar erupted with reactions, comments, side conversations about the show. Amanda remained still, almost like a statue as she read each one, her face expressionless. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of relief. She wasn't naked, at least, but she wasn't fully dressed either. She was wearing the same turquoise panties and bra I'd seen her in the last time I was with her. Despite her emaciated frame, she still had an unsettling beauty about her. It was haunting, almost otherworldly. "There's not much more to say," she said, her voice sounding strained, like it was caught somewhere in her throat. "Thank you guys for offering me so much. My family really needs it, after all the medical bills they've had to pay because of me. They'll be confused at first, but it'll all work out somehow." As she spoke, the chat bar was filled with comments. But one thing caught my eye. Bets. Users were betting on something I didn't understand. "I bet $50 she can't make it past 3, one user typed. Another chimed in. "Look how sick she is. She won't make it past 2. I was already on edge, but the betting made it worse. What was happening here? Amanda's face turned an unhealthy shade of green as she tried to smile. Her lips quivered, and I could see her hands shake. The tension in the air felt suffocating. "Okay," she croaked, her voice barely audible now. Tears welled up in her eyes, a single droplet falling down her cheek as she wiped her nose. "Okay," she repeated, her face flushed, drenched in tears. "Enjoy the show." Then, to my horror, she rolled her chair back, moving further from the screen. That's when I saw it. Something silver gleamed in her hands. A kitchen knife, absurdly large for the moment, its wooden handle gleaming in the light. She raised the knife, both hands gripping it tightly. With a soft grunt, she drove the tip into her abdomen. The screen blurred for a moment, but then I realized I wasn't just watching. I was crying too. The blood that poured from her wound was a thick, dark substance. It wasn't red. It was almost black. I couldn't look away. My body felt frozen, numb, as I stared at her, knowing there was nothing I could do. Her arm went limp, and the knife dropped to the floor, leaving her crumpled and motionless. $20,000 for that, one user typed, voice dripping with sick satisfaction. Some guy just had the most extreme climax of his life, another added. I just sat there, numb, staring at her lifeless body on the screen, unsure if I should call the police, or an ambulance, or something. But there was another feeling, one I couldn't quite name. I had just watched someone die. Right in front of my eyes, the tears kept flowing. But somewhere, beneath the horror, there was a strange, twisted sense of being alive. It sickened me, but I couldn't tear myself away. After what felt like an eternity, I wiped my eyes dry. Everything felt so distant, so numb, and yet I was wide awake in a way I couldn't explain. I waited a full 10 minutes, just staring at the screen before I clicked over to the beta server, curious to see what else was out there.